Welcome to another episode of Maintenance Untangled, where we untangle the complexities of maintenance.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Maintenance Untangled. As always, welcome my co-host Derick. How are you?
Hi Ricky, thanks. Welcome back. Doing great, thank you. It's good to be here, and yeah, trying to stay cool in a very, very hot South Australia. So tell me, Ricky, what are we going to be untangled today?
Well, Derick, today is a very special episode. We're very grateful that we've got a first guest on today. Joining us today is Jason Ryan. He runs the Air Boardroom and the Thrive Dojo. He's got a wealth of experience across the mining industry. Jason, welcome.
G'day, how you doing?
Good, thank you.
So, Jason, I know we spent some time together 16, 17 years ago working together, but if you can tell our audience a little bit more about yourself.
So, bit of a long journey. I started off actually in small business. I ran tile and hardware centres and then got into bathroom renovations and built out some businesses there. We had a daughter with a heart condition, so she went through a few heart surgeries. So we decided to move back to our hometown where both our families were. Just in case things didn't go so well with her, we wanted to make sure she got to spend some time with the family. And when we moved back to Wyler, it was an easy option to get a job in mining. So I started as a green dump truck operator in the mines. And pretty quickly, I brought that entrepreneurial spirit to the mining game, and had different ways and different options to do things on the mine after understanding what the client wanted as far as pulling clean ore out of the ground and having a good process to get the ores to the ship, maximising profit. So I did a lot of work while I was on the machines. So it wasn't too long before I went from the machines to a leadership position. I actually grew the fixed plant services where we fed the plants, loaded the trains, and did the rehandle, building the dams and things like that. And we grew that from about 36 operators to 158 operators. And it turned into a bit of a machine by the time I finished that. So I reckon that was about 4 years into my time in mining. And then I went on to superintendent positions and eventually ending up in a mining manager's role. But during that time, probably one of the biggest pieces was a time that I spent in like a process improvement role. And I got a bit of experience on every part of the mine site and also working very closely with a big team of engineers and really understood the whole operation really well from there. But probably the biggest part was just working with so many people. I probably employed 500 plus people myself on the mine. And you got a real understanding of what you interview and what you get as a result of the interview. And I completely changed the way we interview for roles, and it was purely looking at culture, whether our culture fit for what we're trying to do. And there's no quicker way to change the culture than to employ the culture. So yeah, that was my journey. And then in 2024, started 2024, I got a really serious skin injury from using topical steroids for eczema. And I've been dealing with that for the last 2 years. It meant I had to leave mining. And the obvious choice for me, I was already business coaching. So I went out and started doing some coaching, and now I'm growing that. Been growing that for the last sort of year pretty hard. So that's where I'm at the moment. But yeah, great journey in the mining space. Met a lot of good people and got to be around many different individuals, understand how the brain ticks.
Thanks, Jason. There's always interesting characters in the industry. So yeah, that's it. Before we go into our usual technical subject that we like to talk over, we like to bring something safety to our listeners. Is there something that stood out for you within not only just within your role in mining, but just over your career so far that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, probably the biggest thing for safety, for me, what I found the best improvement in safety was that culture piece I was talking about, because it's very hard to control an individual on what they do. It's all good having processes and systems and all that sort of thing, but if people don't follow them and your culture slides, you end up sort of playing whack-a-mole. And you see that all the time in many industries. And so employing the culture, bringing them in with a really good onboarding. But I think one of the biggest things is sharing plenty of the background information in how they can help run a better business, and giving them enough information, not just KPIs, but giving them information on, statistics, how we're performing, what the results of the performance are, and let them know what does that mean for maintenance when you do, when you're relaying information about your equipment back to maintenance and those sort of things. So just really involving, making them feel like they have a part to play in the business, I found gets a lot more compliance. And also, you need to have a bit of a hard nose about you at times, but I find that if you treat them like humans and build a good rapport with them, they just want to help, and people just naturally get better at their job. But then, obviously, to back that up, you have all the systems in place and the checks that you do and all that sort of thing to make sure that you're getting the results you're aiming for. But I would say the most powerful thing is to build the culture. Once you've got a good culture, people tend to come up with their own ideas, and if you run with their, integrate their inputs into the way you do business, people tend to follow them more. So yeah.
That's a very good point, Jason. And I've found exactly the same in the shutdown space, is that people inherently want to do the right thing. I mean, nobody goes, or well, 99.9% of people don't go out purposefully trying to hurt themselves. And therefore, if you really embrace people and treat them like human beings, the culture is such an important piece. And we found exactly the same in doing shift changes in, or changing gears and shutdowns to better perform. Is if you create the right culture, you start actually attracting the right people. And once the culture is right, if there's somebody that's sort of breaking down the culture, the team will address that. And it takes some of your responsibility as a leader away, because they will actually address the bad apple and either make him uncomfortable to leave or fix him and get him back in line. So, but thanks for that. Jason, just shifting gears a little. Earlier, you mentioned your experience in people management, right? So, give us a little bit of your experience and, I don't know, some of your key learnings around people management.
For me, because I took on at an early stage, I took on the employing of the individuals myself, and the way I do interviews is I do as much research as I can on them. My interviews are very personalised and conversational, so I don't sit there and ask them a heap of questions. Most people I took on were green, so they didn't have any experience, so you didn't need to ask them about how to do pre-starts and all the technical side. It was really conversational, and you build a bit of rapport in that interview process, and then it's important to carry that on, have that personal touch after that when people come into the business. And also in the interviews, I talk a bit about what we are trying to get away from, the behaviours, the issues that we have, and plant the seeds early, especially if I know that they're a good fit, and then just make sure you carry that journey on. So you're very an open book to these people, and make sure you remember names and that sort of thing. And you just find that right from the get-go, they follow processes. They're, depending on where they came from, they tend to be better at following the processes because they don't know any better. They just latch on to what they're trained on. So we developed a lot of checklists and things like that to make sure a new starter comes on. They've got to tick all the boxes before they can be passed out on a piece of equipment. So we know that they've done all the things that we want them to do. They've been given all the information that we want them to get, and they've been exposed to the whole mine site so that when they're on their own, they don't sort of be asked to go somewhere and make a big mistake trying to find it, too scared to ask. So we make sure that the systems set them up for a win, but it's that personal touch all the way through, and making sure first day the supervisor goes and finds them, introduce himself to them, and get their comfort level in a really good space before they hit the ground. And we find if you take away the anxiousness and anxiety at the start, they just spend more time getting into it. They're loving their job, and they just tend to follow on more. And then if you do that with every individual that comes on board, you find that the compliance is just tenfold better, and relationships are built a lot better because they're enjoying their job. They're putting their best forward to the people they meet that are already in the team, and then just back that up with good systems to do the checks and balances, and we just found things just ran so much smoother. I think when I started in the fixed plant services, we were having machines hit each other. We were having machines hitting the plant when they're feeding it, all these things going wrong. And pretty quickly, as the new culture sort of started to come on board, and luckily we grew quite a bit in a short period, and employing that culture, it just really turned it around really quickly. And a lot of the new people would see some of the people that have been there for a long time and pulling them up on it because they've been empowered to. And again, like you said, people didn't feel comfortable in that atmosphere because they're used to a bit of a cowboy atmosphere for such a long time. They either leave, find somewhere that's more like suited to them, but they could see a pretty strong direction that we're going in. And the other thing is, I'd spend a lot of time out at the crib rooms and make an opportunity to catch up with people on the shop floor to just continue building that rapport with them. And again, just that personal touch, And I found that just by doing those things, like they took care of a lot of what we were trying to do. We didn't have to work so hard, that's for sure. So, yeah.
So when you spoke about when you're doing interviews, you make it very personalised. What are some of those examples that you're talking about there, Jason?
Well, a lot of the time, like obviously social media is a big thing. So it's not a bad idea to have a bit of a look at social media, see if you can see, you get a bit of an idea what sort of a person's like, whether they're sort of down to earth, whether they've got, whether they're really, and certainly don't mind outspoken people, but you can sort of tell a bit of a culture about a person. So that just gives you a bit of an idea. And then obviously when you interview them, we go quite deep, and you sort of ask questions like, what do you enjoy? What have you been doing for the last, X amount of time? And then you find things that might be a little bit of an annoyance to them as you're talking about working with other people. So you might ask questions like, have you ever had a time where, you've had a disagreement with someone? And I'll just keep following that rabbit hole down, and maybe even join their side if they're a little bit have got their back up about a topic. Might even join their side and sort of agree with them and see where it takes us. So you're sort of encouraging their personality to come out, and you can sort of tell if they start to get really loose. You might tell that they're not a real culture fit for what we're doing by the language they use, and you can sort of tell as you feed their annoyance in something, you sort of their true colours come out, and it's about taking their guard down early and sort of almost being like a friend, but asking those questions. So the quicker you can get the guard down and go deep on some of those things, you get a pretty good idea. And some people, when you do that with them, you just see a lot of integrity bubble up, and it builds a lot of trust in who they are. And I guess I've employed enough people to see what you talk to and the result you get out, because some people are really good at the gift of the gab, but you can sort of see the true colours. So then I could put that back into my interviewing process to make sure I really get their true colours out in the interview. And if I'm in doubt, sometimes I'll just call a second interview, and see how they handle that sort of thing, or those sort of things. So, but very conversational, and most people get their guard down very quickly when you use that style of interview, and don't just direct cold questions at them. For
So
sure.
the usual follow a typical script is usually not the best way to go.
Honestly, I never ever used a script. I pretty much had some similar questions for most people, but you would let them sort of drive where the conversation went, depending on what their answers were, for sure. Yeah. So I'd take notes and all that sort of thing, but definitely I didn't ask any of the usual questions. Yeah, I ended up developing my own style eventually. So yeah.
So, Jason, just you mentioned hanging out in the crib rooms. For those people, one that doesn't know what a crib room is, um, can you tell us why do you think that's important to spend time in the crib rooms?
Couple of things. So the crib room is obviously where people have their lunch. So they might have their first or second break back at the crib room to go and have a bite to eat and have a bit of time off the machine. So what I usually try and do is go around the pits, have a look for some good work, talk with the leader who did this job, and then I'll make a point to go and find that person at lunchtime and just have a chat with them about the work they did. Give them a bit of a pat on the back and say, really good job. You find there's good jobs and there's bad jobs, and most people will look at the bad job and go and give the feedback on the bad job. But I found a lot of the time, if you can find something good they've done and go and praise them on what they did and ask them, how did you go about doing that? So we can teach other people how to get their jobs right like you've done. Then you find when they go out there, they don't tend to cut corners. They tend to replicate what they were patted on the back for. Um, Gives an opportunity just to sort of have a personal talk with people, and try and keep most things out in the pit positive. And some of the negatives you might put through the supervisor and get them to sort of have a quiet word with an individual personally. But often I would try and go out there and find at least one or two good things that I can go and give feedback on, because I found that it just changed the behaviour a lot more. If you're just going out there and giving negatives, people just sort of turn off. But if you give positives, it sort of sparks them up and they actually perform better. So, but it's just an opportunity to have that personal conversation with people, build the rapport, and just drive home what we're looking for, and what they can see what we're looking for by just the conversations that we have.
And just running with that, I suppose, having those difficult conversations when stuff's not great, like in a poor or negative fashion, Jason, what's one advice that you'd have for people? Because that's the thing that a lot of managers or a lot of people stepping into new management roles really struggle with.
I think the best thing to do is, like, I'll give you an example. You could go out there and you could see that someone's built an intersection and it's not up to scratch. It's not compliant and obviously high risk when you've got trucks and light vehicles running in the same circuits. So rather than just go and find the one that's bad and go and have a go at someone or give them feedback on that bad one, you'd go and look for one that's really good. And then you'd find the person that did that one, bring them over to the one that's good and just say, this was really good what you've done here. How do you think we get all the rest of these up to this standard? And then let them do all the talking. Let them tell you. Then you know that they know what good is. And then you might bring up the one that's, I noticed this one's not quite to this. Do you reckon you could do this sort of job on that intersection? And then just leave it at that. They know in themselves that they did a bad job on that one, but you've handled it in such a way that you didn't need to have a crack at them, but they can see you can see what's going on, So it sort of puts a positive spin on it in such a way that they sort of feel like, oh, won't do that again. But if they're a repeat offender, then you might have a bit of a quiet word on the side to say, this can't keep going on. This is why. But ultimately, I like to try and keep it a little bit more positive and moving, and then you just keep a closer eye on those sort of people that may be a little bit looser with their standard of work. But and then things like going to the pre-start meeting at the start of the next day and sort of praising that same person on how they brought that intersection up to speed, you know. So there's just all those sort of ways to just keep the show moving without getting people's back up. And you'll find that person, after you've had that conversation, had a talk to the PSI, you'll find that person will perform a lot better because it was just handled in such a good way, you know. Certainly not afraid to have those tough conversations if they're needed, but I think the first port of call isn't to make it a negative. It's to really understand what is their way of thinking, do they understand? And I'm always one to take a bit of ownership myself and go, have we trained this person properly? Have we done all the checks and balances to make sure we got it right? Because a lot of the time when you run a big show, there's mistakes to be made, you know, and the last thing I want to do is come down on someone because of a mistake we made. So I'll give 2 chances, hand on heart, know that we've done everything we can, and I've personally stepped in and had the conversations with them before I take more of a negative sort of feedback route. So that works really well. And anyone can do those conversations. Doesn't matter if you're not good at tough conversations, you can have those conversations quite easily because they're more of a positive conversation. Probably the other one is one thing is, I guess the production is what I mostly worked in, and we obviously work hand in hand with maintenance. So it's about making giving our employees all the information. How does the whole chain of events work with how we run a mine? So maintenance is a massive part, and you always get a little bit of a them and us with production and maintenance because production aren't doing their pre-starts correctly or they're not treating the machines correctly, and maintenance get their back up about that, and then production get their back up on maintenance because they're not fixing things correctly. So once people understand the full chain of events, they realise that their behaviour on a machine can cause issues with the maintenance of the machine. And it's not maintenance's fault, it actually shows them how, by them not doing their job correctly, it actually hinders maintenance ability to maintain a piece of equipment. So it's about being more transparent and a lot of feedback. So I would actually go to maintenance pre-start meetings and give feedback from the production side of things, and then I'd go to production and give feedback from the maintenance side of things. And then what we found is the 2 groups worked more intertwined and better relationships built between the 2. And the other thing we do just to get that relationship better is when there was like a rain day or downtime, we would offer people to go and help in the maintenance department. So whether that's tidying up work areas, being a bit of a, you know, side hand, obviously they wouldn't work on any equipment, but it's just about working together. We've got nothing to do today, so let's go and help our brothers out so they can spend more time fixing the machines and less time, you know, doing the cleanup work and that sort of thing. So I found that was quite important just for that transparency across departments. And then that same thing worked with drill and blast as well. And even when we had contractors on site doing work, just building those, you know, opening up the communication pathways between departments. Pretty powerful.
I think, Jason, I would like to echo what you just said. So I've always lived in the maintenance space, and I think the same goes. You know, I've always said to my maintenance teams is, you know, what's your contribution? Because if operations give you a machine to maintain and you don't maintain it properly and hand it back to them and it's not properly maintained, why should they give it back to you again for the next time? So, and I think it's very important for both sides to see and understand the other side of the equation. Like you said, so that the operations team understand what's maintenance requirements, but maintenance also understands what's operational requirements, and use the machine within the limits of its capability, but also then service it within the requirements so that it is reliable, and so you actually use it within, you know, and not misuse the machine and then don't maintain it properly. So I think that's very, very important, that relationship.
And I think inherently people get better at their job. So what do they need to know to make good decisions in their job is an important part of it. And And we saw that time and time again. If they've got the correct information, they tend to get better at their job. It's only when they get frustrated, don't understand something, this feels pointless. Those are the things that hinder people doing a better job. So, yeah, absolutely makes sense.
That also relates to any any safety systems, safety processes, procedures, whatever you have. If people feel there's no point to it, it becomes a burden.
Yeah,
If it's just a tick and flick exercise and there's no real benefit, it becomes a burden for people, and that's when you start getting complacency and people start doing the wrong thing.
yeah, yeah. And that becomes a cultural issue eventually. It starts to
Yes,
spread across
100%.
other things.
Yep.
Definitely.
Cool. Well, Jace, thanks so much for joining us on Maintenance Untangled today. Really appreciate you sharing your experience around people management. I'd actually like to invite you back. I'd like to hear more about what you're doing now, because I think some of the business coaching stuff that you're doing now is, could also affect everyone within the industry. So do you have time in the future to come back and join us?
Would love to. I love talking business.
Awesome. I'd be keen to learn a little bit myself as well. So
Good.
obviously, anyone who wants to connect, we'll add a link for Jace's business, the Air Boardroom. Reach out to him. He'd be more than happy enough to obviously help you. I hope, Jace.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I give a lot away, and I love working with business owners, because business owners, they know what it's like to do the hard work. They're action takers, so they're the best people to work with.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jason. As a business owner myself, I echo what you just said. It's all about taking action. So thanks for the conversation about people management, and yeah, looking forward to having continue the conversation with you. So to everyone listening, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe, share the podcast around, and keep an ear out for the next episode of Untangled. So, Ricky, what are we talking about next time?
But Derick, I think something that you and I have sort of discussed previously, and I think it's something really important to bring up, is KPIs. I see a lot out there that KPIs are used as sometimes as a big stick, rather than understanding the performance. And I think that's something we could definitely touch on. Hopefully we'll keep the episode, short. I know that you and I can end up, 2-3 hours having this conversation. So, yeah.
All right. Perfect. We'll talk again. Thanks again, Jason. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks, guys.